Now, I want to honour Rob this afternoon by critically discussing something that I think is very difficult to question in Australia today, namely the contemporary idealisation of a certain kind of individual freedom. In doing so, though, I want to acknowledge my deep debt to Clive Hamilton and to Anne Mann, both of whom have written extensively and with great penetration and insight on aspects of the subject on which I'm really going to offer just a few brief reflections. Now, the meaning of freedom is, of course, notoriously contested. The freedom I'm talking about this afternoon might be defined simply as the unconstrained liberty and ability to act in accordance with one's own preferences. And I think that freedom in this sense has become installed as a kind of paramount good in contemporary Australian political and cultural discourse. This valorisation of a certain kind of radical individual freedom underpins our political debates and our public policy formulations, just as it does our commercial advertising and our popular culture. Now, almost as an aside, one of the huge pleasures of this conference is that it has provided 2 days of respite from the endless praise of radical freedom. And here we have repeatedly heard positive limits being evoked, for example, by Pat Dodson, speaking of obligations to country, by Maurice Schwartz, a man, I'm not sure if he's here this afternoon, but to whom the whole of Australia owes a debt of gratitude for the contribution to public debate and democracy in this country, and Chris Fike as well, for praising the fact that it's hard work and dedication that is required for good writing and for the long-form essay. To Raymond Gaiter, who described so wonderfully the real demands of dear friendship being sincerely pursued. And when Rob spoke of his return to Australia and his reasons for return to Australia, or rather Raymond spoke about Rob's reasons given many years ago, that was in a sense a positive invocation of the importance of limits in a life. And I have to say that when I was judging whether or not to come back to Australia, I was very influenced by a conversation I'd had with Rob about the sense of obligation to a place where I'd spent the first 30-odd years of my life. Now, although he is an Austrian rather than an Australian, if we have a man for this age, it is surely Felix Baumgartner. Now, you may recall that in October last year, Baumgartner reached an altitude of almost 40 kilometres up, strapped inside a small capsule attached to a helium balloon, before hurtling back to Earth at a speed of well over 1,000 kilometres an hour. Perhaps no human being has ever been as physically free as this man who jumped from space. Baumgartner himself professed to be motivated by the desire for liberation. "I started skydiving," he said afterwards, "because I loved the idea of freedom." It is a commonplace assumption in 21st century Australia that to live the good life is to emulate Baumgartner, to seek the weightlessness of complete personal emancipation from the cares and concerns that ordinarily and properly accompany human existence. It is an idea of freedom predicated on extreme individual autonomy, expressed through the reification of personal choice and the constant pursuit of a cosmopolitan, consumerist and mobile existence. Now, cultural artefacts, I think, provide the best evidence of the paradigm in operation, and following on from yesterday's discussion of the future of the university, I can think of nothing more characteristic of the times than the slogan used to advertise Sydney University's MBA program last year: "Sydney MBA, me first." Now, away from a campaign that was so far beyond the boundary of parody, it's hard to know where to begin, but was dreamt up in the clearly profane world of university marketing departments, I think that the spirit of the age was observed with very great acuity by the veteran Australian rock band Cold Chisel in a track released last year. "Everybody," the song goes, "wants to be famous. Everybody wants more things. Everybody wants their name on the guest list. Everybody wants to get in free. Everybody wants complete fidelity from 2 or 3 lovers simultaneously. Everybody wants to have children. No one wants to hang around. Everybody wants the world to cry when they're lying in the cold, cold ground. Everybody wants the ideal body, waiting when they get back home, whether that's the one in Shanghai, London, New York City, or the villa in Rome. Life for everybody is all about choice, and what everybody does is their own business. All choices are equally valid in a world that exists only for everybody's stimulation. Limits, it seems, are for losers. In this world, holding obligations associated with care, vocation, place, or faith are at best seen as no more than choices to be set alongside going to the gym, or baking novelty cupcakes, or working as a share trader, or going trekking in Peru. Now, crucially, the embrace of radical freedom as an ideal occurs across the mainstream left-right spectrum, and I'm indebted to the critique we heard on this subject from Carmen and David in the last session. The example I'll give is that in a widely reported, although barely analysed, speech to the Chifley Centre dealing with her conception of Labor values, Julia Gillard argued that the ALP's mission is essentially one of enabling individual empowerment. There's nothing like soaring rhetoric, because Australians want to make their own choices and control their own lives. It was no errant line. Gillard's entire speech revolved around the notion that a better life is one with more freedom to choose, and that any demurrer from this expansion of personal autonomy would be unfortunate and aberrant. Now, to be clear, I refer to this speech not to pick on Gillard, but because I think the Prime Minister was giving voice to views that are widely held among the political and institutional left in this country. Indeed, among many so-called progressives, and I use the term because that seems to be the preferred term because people are so terrified of using the expression the left these days, there is an almost reflexive contempt for the traditional limiters of freedom, social convention, loyalties to place and community that require that you actually live there, family, and even the long-term discipline that is required to genuinely master a craft or vocation. At the same time, there is an all too easy and abiding assumption among progressives that more choice, expressed both as an ever-increasing palette of experiential, geographical, lifestyle and consumer experiences, and, more fundamentally, in identity-based legal and political rights, will not only aggregate to greater freedom for all, but will, in some alchemic way, lead to a generally better and more sustainable society. The condition of the digital age, of course, is both symptom and agent of the kind of radical autonomy which I'm describing. It is emblematic of our times that Baumgartner's unique experience of freedom was enacted live in front of more than 8 million viewers on YouTube. The internet allows us both to individualise and narcissistically display our tastes, choices and interactions in a fashion that marks a radical rupture from the mass technologies of the 20th century. And while, yes, it is true that digital communities are formed, as is now well observed, they are above all characterised by the weakness of their bonds. More insidiously, in the digital realm, we can all be invisible men, in the sense intended by H.G. Wells, as the web puts before us the constant temptation of being able to act or choose without any consequence. Online, we can all enjoy the freedom offered by the ring of Gyges, able to live out a fantasy of unmediated preferences, unrestrained by anything except broadband speed. Assumptions about extreme freedom have become so profoundly entrenched that even mortality may be seen now as no more than a matter of individual volition. In 2009, the writer and journalist Catherine Mayer coined the term amortals, for whom the process of ageing is no more than the stuff of choice. Mayer argued that the defining characteristic of amortality is to live in the same way, at the same pitch, doing and consuming much the same things, from late teens up until death. And perhaps, even then, maybe freedom of choice is the optimal approach. When that secular saint of cosmopolitan freedom, Apple founder Steve Jobs, died in 2011, his sister, the novelist and professor of English literature, Mona Simpson, was by his side. Now, she would later write a moving description of the death of her brother. But in that description, she recorded that he seemed to be climbing with will, work ethic, and strength to the end of his life. Interestingly, she also describes very favourably the fact that he went through 67 different nurses before coming across 3 that he felt comfortable with. So clearly freedom to choose in a privatised health system is also to be valorised. Now, Job's last words were widely reported, and they were both banal and ecstatic. "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow," he is reported to have uttered before dying. "Death," Mona Simpson wrote, "didn't happen to Steve, he achieved it." Now, these are words which, although widely reported, seem to have been met with no great public puzzlement. Now, when even death is seen as being an act of lifestyle choice, it is clear that our idea of freedom has become radical indeed. Yet the paradox at the heart of all of this is that the essential truth of the human condition grasped by Kierkegaard remains true. Extreme freedom does not make us free. When Felix Baumgartner fell to earth, he found that his was a false liberty, because in order to be free, he had to wear an insulated spacesuit that he feared, quote, feared and hated, and in which he felt trapped. To participate in the social and cultural experience of radical freedom is to perceive the contradiction of Baumgartner's suit. That which made him fantastically free left him anxious, lonely, and tormented. It is the dark inner truth of our radical freedom that lofty delight is so often accompanied by internal misery, because weightlessness goes against what it is to be truly human. And of course, and I will stop on this point, more or less on time, I think, which is a source of considerable professional satisfaction always. And of course, for everybody who gets to fly through space, there are consequences. Now, my day job is about the consequences for the environment. That is the context in which I am part of the Unholy Alliance. And I'm grateful to David McKnight for his comments on the relationship between ever-expanding horizons of personal consumption and the consequences that exist, for the direct consequences that is for the environment earlier today. But here, though, I want to talk just for a moment about the enormous cast of ground crew that enables everyone who gets to fly through space. And it seems to me that this ground crew is subject to ever-increasing disparagement and structural disadvantage. A great schism has opened up, I think, in our society between the sky dwellers who get to enjoy the pleasures of radical freedom and are venerated for it, and the rest, who remain earthbound and subject to limits, but whom do all the thankless work of care and of ensuring social cohesion and institutional continuity. People with serious obligations, of which full-time carers are the most obvious, but also those with pets, gardens, vocations, professions, local communities, students that they care about, or anything else that implies fixity or limits, are the constant losers in a culture that prefers and rewards a free-floating existence. In this age of radical freedom, those who experience and care about limits are the new forgotten people of contemporary Australian politics. Thanks.